Before You Hand Over the Keys, with host Anne-Marie Hayes. This is episode 3, part 2 of the conversation with Christine Raby, tips for the DIY instructor and driving coach. Another area that I wanted to cover a little bit is for the do-it-yourselfers or the family coach, and maybe mom's the better coach, maybe dad's the better coach. Be honest. I mean, you need to be alert, you need to be aware, you need to have pretty good skills to begin with, but you also need to be fairly even-tempered. And in the car, when you are coaching, it's not the time to ask them how they did on the math test or, who they're dating. I mean, you really need to get all of those things out. You can't be talking about those personal issues or those anxiety ridden discussions when they're driving. It has to be focused totally on driving.
For the do-it-yourselfers, if you do want to do it yourself, maybe recruit an uncle or an aunt or somebody else also in the family who can do some of the training with you, because it's honestly, I learned the lesson early on because I taught my little brother how to drive, and I'm embarrassed to say he crashed the car within a couple of weeks, and he did something at a stop sign, and I said, "Hey, what were you thinking?" And he's like, "Well, you didn't tell me that." So sometimes when you're teaching somebody that you assume that they're coming in with a certain amount of knowledge, right? Yeah, and I'm like, "What do you mean you didn't know that?" Yeah, so I learned that lesson early on. But like you said, with the girls or with your own children, the anxiety is through the roof, and I just wanted to make sure we got it right. And I even did it, they had a couple of different instructors, so we had a couple of different points of view, and but that's not to say I didn't follow up with a lot of training after, and I think that's on our list to talk about as well. Is even after they pass their license doesn't mean that we can just now let go of the reins, because it's not over.
That's
They're
right.
not cooked yet.
Oh, it's definitely not
Yeah.
over. And that is another issue, which is a little off topic here, but the when they finally pass and get their G2, and now they can drive alone, or when they get their full G, a lot of young people look at that as, okay, badge of honor, I am an excellent driver. And parents look at that too. Okay, he's got his license now, job done. Oh my God. First of all, the license stays the property of the province and they can take it back anytime they want. But aside from that, it is only saying you have basic skills and you can continue driving on roads and continue learning. It is not you have reached the pinnacle of driving fame and you can do anything you want on the roads now.
We have to make a poster. That has to be
Yeah.
that should be printed on the back of the license.
But it's true, and we look at it like this big badge of honor, and I mean, parents are sending around emails. Guess who got their license? Yeah, it's they're still learning. I mean, my God, I've been driving for more hours than I'm willing to admit, or more years than I'm willing to admit. I've had more training than most people have. You've had way more than me, and I'm still learning. I come across new situations, new things on the road, and I think, oh my God, what do I do here? So it's there's a lot to know about driving and a lot of stuff. I mean, somebody makes a right turn, the teen makes a right turn, and somebody says, good job. Okay, well, what was a good job about it? I got into, what did I do well? What could I have done better? And those parents have a real hard time,
The bar is not set very high, unfortunately. And you're right when you're saying that the learning should never end. We should always, strive to continue to expand our experiences and so on. Very important.
Thanks. So, we're talking about for parents who are either do it yourself instructors or coaching their teens to drive, and language. There's an element of language too. And for example, the word right should only be used as a direction, not as agreement. Otherwise, you get into situations like, okay, at the next intersection, I want you to turn left. You want me to turn left? Right. Yeah. So you get into, so if you switch it to correct, then you know where you're going. So those kinds of things. You want to only have that. And it's not okay, turn left now, it's at the next intersection or at the next intersection where you can legally do so. But don't try to trick them. I want you to turn left and there's a no left turn sign, or it's no left turn between noon and 2 and it's between noon and 2. Like, just don't try to trick them.
Hey, and you sound so smart when you're sitting in the passenger seat and you said, okay, not at this intersection, but at the next one, we're going to be making a left turn if legal. So you sound so professional and they will like it. But, you know, the word correct is, again, same thing. You sound so professional.
And it makes it so much less confusing, right?
Exactly.
It's and if you work on that so that you're telling them in advance.
Yeah. Well, look, your timing is important. And the timing has to be respected in the sense that you know you're going to the mall. So when you yourself are driving, you have that ability to pre-plan your lane changes and pre-plan all your maneuvers and so on and so forth. When you're just out practicing with the your son or daughter, you're not going anywhere in specifically. So therefore they're not having to do that pre-prep and all that kind of stuff. So, as much as the language is important, also the timing is very important on when and how you say things, in order to get them to pre-plan. And it's all about making those brain waves to kind of making the paths, I guess you can say.
And I can tell you from experience that even though they've lived in the same neighborhood for 15 years, my experience was I could take my daughter 5 blocks from here when we're driving. And I'd say, and this was kind of, further along. She was doing really well and everything. Okay, now can you find your way home? No. Where are we? Because they're sitting in the back seat, they're looking at their phones, they're not paying attention, they're not really, and they depend on GPSs anyway. So they don't have the same kind of north south. I mean, my daughter says to me, like still today, don't confuse me with that north south stuff. Just tell me which way. We have to kind of meet them where they are, not trying to drag them to where we are.
You're not unique. It's the same thing here is they don't know where they are. They don't know how to get back home and they will rely on GPS. My daughter's 22 and she still GPSs how to get to the mall. I go, "What? I don't understand." And she goes, "It works for me. Just leave me alone."
GPSs are not a bad thing. My problem is they shouldn't be looking at them. It's listen to it, take the instruction, but don't follow blindly either because they make mistakes. So you can use it to guide you without looking at the device. And but don't look blind, don't turn blindly because it told you to. I remember reading some years ago about a man who had some children in his car. He turned right because the GPS told him it was a one-way street and they were hit and it was quite a disaster. So you have to continue, even though the GPS is telling you one thing and it might be right, you have to continue to use your own judgment.
And like you said, meet them where they're at. So if you know that this is going to be their reality, then that has to be part of your experience or your lessons that you're coaching with them with. Say, okay, I'm going to hold the GPS, and today our only lesson is you need to get us to the mall with only listening to the GPS. You're not allowed to look at it. That's a lesson in and itself, and it's something that mom and dad can easily do.
Which brings up another point, and that is backing up and using the camera. I know I'm kind of jumping around a bit here, but backing up using the camera. And I've seen comments from young people saying, nobody told me I couldn't use the camera. Well, we're telling you right now, your youth, when they're being tested, cannot use their camera. And there's a reason for that. I mean, the camera is a helpful device, but it does not give you a full picture of everything that's happening behind you. It doesn't give you a picture of who's approaching from your left or from your right. And so you still, even if when you do use the camera, which will not be on your test, you need to be looking in all directions as well.
It's a tool, so it can be used in addition to what you're already doing. You back to basics, and then this is an enhancement to what you need to do. 100%. So again, technology is wonderful, but technology breaks. So we need to understand the hows and whys about what are you supposed to be looking for when you're backing out of the driveway. Where's your danger zone coming from, type of thing. So it's all about talking and communicating. So we're right back to that language. and making sure that they understand the hows and whys behind it as well.
You want to be careful of how you're saying things, giving clear instruction. And that means starting in a parking lot or starting in a place where you can get a few skills down before you move to a quieter neighborhood street, and then kind of advance more as time goes on and they start to pick up skills.
Yeah, and I just want to add one more thing to that, Emery, is that we really want to stress to be flexible. So let's say that in your master plan you wanted to go to the mall during your practice session, and you wanted them to turn right at this particular intersection, and they're coming in hot, they're coming in too fast. It's not going to be a safe turn. Then feel free to break in and say, okay, we're going to skip that. We're going to keep going straight, and we're going to try it at the next one. So, you know what I mean? There's more than one way to kind of get there. And so don't put that, if things are not going well, we have to just, don't be afraid to change tactics, really. Or if today you were supposed to be practicing to go to the mall, but the roads are too snowy, okay, we're not going to go to the mall. Let's just drive around the block a few times and let's practice, turning right or turning left in heavy snow, something like that. Be flexible.
And when it comes to practice, and we talked a little bit about how much practice students need, um, 150 trips to the mall are not good practice. You need to switch it up, and you talked a little bit about that before, about country roads and higher speed roads and neighborhood roads, and getting used to stop signs and four-way stop signs, and switching it up. And that's really, really important that you give them the widest breadth of experience that you can, because the safest time for them is when you're in the car with them or an instructor is in the car with them. It's that first year when they're driving on their own that is the most dangerous.
Agreed, 100%. And yeah, and like I said, the more experiences that you can give them, the better. So be creative with it. Like you said, don't just go to the mall or go to school or go to work. Those hours are important, but they're not the end all be all. Try and add all kinds of different little fun little elements into it.
The idea of fun elements. I mean, okay, today at the end of the lesson, we'll stop at Tim's and get a cappuccino. Because as much as it is stressful for you as the co driver, it is stressful for them too.
I just want to encourage parents to keep it fun and keep it light. It doesn't always have to be so serious. You can plan some little tiny exercises with them and learn to laugh with them a little bit as well. So it's supposed to be fun, and it could be a bonding experience between the two of you as well.
It can be a great bonding experience because it's time alone in the car. And even when you're kind of parked and having your Tims, you kind of learn stuff that you wouldn't have heard otherwise. So I think that's a very valuable thing. Just don't be talking about those emotional issues while they're driving.
No, no. Again, keep it light and airy at that point. But you're right that you're going to find that you will definitely feel closer to your teen. They're going to tell you things that, and unfortunately, like we just to bring it back to what we were talking a bit earlier about how sometimes the inappropriate discussions between a student and an instructor. That's how these things sometimes snowball, right? And so one thing I try to tell my instructors or make sure I, you know, express is that there are boundaries that have to be kept there, and as what you're saying as well is shut it down. We have to Let's concentrate on what we're doing here, and there'll be time for that later. So that's the thing, right? Parents need to know where that boundary is and say, you know what, you just shocked me right there, but we're going to put a pin in that and we're going to talk about that later. Right now, everything is good and we're going to head home or whatnot.
Yeah, I agreed. Another quick tip for parents is to drive with the headlights on when the teen is in the car. It's just another thing, a little thing that helps other cars see them, and gives a little bit of extra visibility if it's kind of dusk and not quite time for the headlights to come on by themselves. Another thing for parents, most people do not engage the parking brake when they park, and do not release it and when they start up. But the testers will be looking for that. So if you're going to teach, now, would you agree with that?
100%. Oh, yes. I'm just thinking, oh gosh, we could do another podcast on safety equipment, on how things have been building it up in the vehicle, for safety issues, and do we count on them? Do we rely on them too much? It's exciting, right? Because I'm my Camry, the lights go on automatically, and the parking brake engages itself automatically. All those things but if we don't talk about it with the new driver, they take for granted that that's what's going to happen in all cars. For the DIYer, if mom and dad are going to take this on their own, these are things that they need to keep in mind, that it's again starting with the basics. So as much as they're driving, a higher end car, our teens are not going to start with that. They're going to start with the Ford Focus or you know, I don't want to say any names, the lower end cars.
Yeah, or a car that's several years old, right? That may not be up to date on some of these safety features. Another parent said this to me, you know what when my daughter was learning to drive, what we would do at the dinner table is we'd take a look at some YouTube videos, and some of them are crashes, and it's kind of like, why did those cars crash, and have a conversation about that. What did the driver miss? What was the driver doing wrong? Looking at real life situations and figuring out how that could have been avoided. So those kinds of things. There are also a lot of great safety videos. We have a lot on our website at Teens Learn to Drive, TL2D. We have great videos about how to share the road with big trucks. That's another whole lesson about Ontario, we're very blessed. We have a very strong economy, but that means a lot of big trucks on the road, and they have huge blind spots and take a long time, a football field or longer, to stop. And so, as drivers, we need to be aware of that. We need to give them their space. Um, I can't tell you how many times I've heard, "Oh my God, that truck driver just cut me off." He had no idea you were there because he couldn't see you. And that was a cool experience I had. I got to drive one of those trucks at one time. It was an automatic and just in a parking lot. And it was an event we were doing. But oh my God, the blind zones around them are huge. And the driver just can't see them. So you've got to be very aware of where you're driving around big trucks. And it's not always the trucker's fault.
And mad respect to our truck drivers, 100%.
I love our trucking partners. They're just amazing. Another thing that parents can do before, so there are a couple of things. I'm kind of shifting gears here again, but pardon the pun. Things that parents can do beforehand. So one is maybe the teen is 15 or so, not quite able to get their G1 yet, but very eager to learn. Or maybe a little anxious and not so eager to learn. So it's a good exercise, and that is putting them in the passenger seat. And while you're driving, you're not putting them behind the wheel because they're not licensed to do that. But while you're driving, talking about what you see on the road ahead. I see that sign telling me to look out for animals, what that means. And so, you're scanning for that, how to scan a road properly. Um, that you see speed limit change. You see pedestrians that look like they might step off the curb. All of those kinds of things, and helping them to learn to kind of predict who might pull out in front of them, who doesn't look like they're watching the road, those kinds of things. And then when you have done that a little bit, then turn it over to them and get them to tell you what they're seeing. And so they're looking far enough ahead on the road to see what's happening. Because one of the biggest mistakes that I see drivers making is they're watching the car directly in front of them. And that gives them no time to make any changes if something happens suddenly on the road ahead.
You know what? You brought up so many very good points there, Anne-Marie. So I'm going to tip my hat off to you right away, because this again is something very very easy that mom and dad can do. It is to do we call it commentary driving in our industry, and for a new driver it takes a lot of practice. They're not going to be very good at it. They're going to stumble quite a bit. So when mom and dad, who is experienced and has done this quite a lot, they're going to say, I see a stop sign, I see the parked car, I see the light, I see that. So now you're directing that student's eyes upwards, so they're not, like you said, focused on the car in front, because that is a classic brand new driver is what they do. So the commentary driving is really important. I love that. I love that you're getting their eyes looking up. And I also am going to take that one step further, is you can go to Walmart or any of those stores and you can buy one of those baby mirrors, and it's just a section. Yep, suck it up to the window. And then they can also be watching behind. And if you want to get them to be a participant, you could say, okay, Jake, we're going to be doing a lane change up ahead. I want you to tell me when you think it's safe for me to do that. And so they can do some of the decision making for you before they're even behind the wheel of the car. And so I love how you started that. And I think these are great tips that any parent can do with their child or teen.
And you know what? That baby mirror is a great investment for when you're in the passenger seat with them too, because now you can see what's going on behind the car when they're driving. So I think that's a great investment. You can get them in a lot of different places. You can get them in baby departments, right? So parents can monitor babies in the back seat, but you can also get them in automotive departments, and it's a great investment. They're not that expensive, and they really help both of you see what's around the vehicle. So that's a really good idea. Another thing they can do while they're in that time before they can take the G1 is take them out to the car and familiarize them with the vehicle. And you're not starting the vehicle. You don't even have the keys in your hand, but you can show them what the dashboard looks like, where things are located. That's when you can talk about the accelerator versus the brake. I think for most people, starting on an automatic car is a good idea. Some parents really like standard because they say then their teen can't have their cell phone in their hand. I think that's more of a matter of training.
I remember doing a radio interview with an oh my gosh, I was young then. I was probably only in my 20s and he was in his 80s, and we that was a debate that we had. Should you learn first on a standard or an automatic? And I really think that driving is complicated enough. Let me train your brain first. But he had some really good points about learning on a standard, because that's forcing you really to pay attention to the traffic scene in front of you, and you have to make your adjustments quite early. So, there's pros and cons for each of them. But I'm with you. Technology is wonderful. Why would I, why would I struggle on doing a standard?
Another advantage of standard is that one time in my youth again, I was driving my car, which was standard, and the brake line, I don't know what happened, but I lost the braking fluid, and all of a sudden I had no brakes. And which was pretty darn scary. I was on the 400 headed up north, and but because it was standard, I was able to gear down. I mean, it was an easier process in a standard vehicle than in an automatic vehicle, but it was all safe in the end. So but that brings me to another point, and that is, and you and I have talked about this a little bit before, is about mistakes can be a really good thing when you're coaching. And I'm going to tell the same story that I told you before, and that was when my daughter Emily was learning to drive. We were on a not a residential street, but not a busy intersection. We were coming up to an intersection. It wasn't a busy intersection. So she pulls into the intersection. She's got a green light, but there's traffic coming from the other direction. She sits there and waits. The light turns yellow and she starts to make her turn. And I yelled, "Stop." And she stopped. And then the light turned red, and a car just sailed through, didn't speed up, didn't slow down, just went right by the intersection next to us. And so she completed her turn and she was quite shaken up about it. And she said, "How did you know?" And I said, "I was watching that driver's eyes. She wasn't slowing down and she was staring straight ahead. And so I didn't think she was going to stop." And so Emily, she was shaken up about it. Well, about 6 months later, she's got her G2. I'm no longer her co driver. Now we're on Dundas, a big, busy, busy intersection, 3 lanes in each direction. And I'm not paying attention. And she's making a left turn. She pulls out on the green light into the intersection. The light turns yellow. She waits. A car goes through, another car goes through, the light turns red, another car goes through with a baby seat in the back seat. And she waited because of that near near miss experience. She knew to wait until the traffic stopped. And thank God for that, because I would have been the one that was hit. I was in the passenger seat. But sometimes those near misses, but that's why it's so important too for the co-driver to be watching right? It's you're the experienced eyes on the road. You can't be on your cell phone. You can't be chatting with someone in the back seat. You can't be thumbing through a magazine. You got to be watching. You are the experienced eyes on the road. And so those near misses can be just so valuable in hindsight.
And speaking of the student who maybe doesn't pass the road test, and they already have low confidence, they already have high anxiety, and then they were unsuccessful. And I say to them, listen, I look at that almost as a gift to you, in the sense that, okay, so if something went wrong at that particular left-hand turn, I promise you, you're going to be extra vigilant on left-hand turns from now and forever, right? And so therefore it actually is going to enhance your driving skills rather than take away from it. So every experience is a learning experience, and I think it's going to serve them well in the end. So try not to be too hard on yourself. All mistakes and experiences have value to them, good or bad.
And if that student wasn't ready to be driving on their own in the tester's view, then that's a blessing that they get another shot to do it. Because if they go out too early and they really aren't ready, it could have tragic consequences. So it gives you another opportunity to help them prepare.
And I believe in the honesty policy as well, in the sense that if I feel that, and you could do the same with your son or daughter. Unfortunately, it's tough love. Just say, no, honey, I'm you're not going to go for your test just yet, because heaven forbid if they pass, right? I mean, the standards for the drive test, is really not what it could be. If the test was a half an hour long, or if we had all the resources in the world, we can make the test a little bit more difficult. So I don't want to make the conversation about that, but the test itself is, the big fear is what happens if they pass when they're not ready.
Yeah, it's a blessing sometimes if they don't pass. Maybe all the time it's a blessing if they don't pass, because it means they weren't prepared. I mean, I remember parents calling, and when I was with the Canadian Tire Drivers Academy, and saying, "Oh, do you rent vehicles?" These are teens who did not take a course with us, because of course any driving school will provide a vehicle for a fee. For your driving test if you took the lessons, but they just wanted to rent the vehicle for the test. And I said, no, like we don't do that. And they said, well, what am I going to do? Because there's no way that my kid is driving my car. I have a Mercedes. If you are so worried about the state of your vehicle because your kid isn't ready, um, I think you need to go back to the drawing board and get them better lessons, or do more to teach them to drive. It's never to me about protecting the vehicle. It's about protecting the occupants of the vehicle. And that's really what driving instruction is all about. Everybody thinks learning to drive is such an easy thing. Oh my God, we could talk about this for hours. It's very complicated. You have to be doing so many things and watching so many things and listening to so many things all at the same time, plus using your judgment skills, and it's complicated. One of the things that is, we will put a link, is from my book, which is which is 3 Keys to Keeping Your Teen Alive: Lessons for Surviving the First Year of Driving. But there are lots of good, if you're going to do it yourself, there are lots of good lesson plans there, and behaviors to talk about, and conversations to have, and that kind of stuff. But there is also a sheet about things that you should do when you're in the car. And they should know, like, how to, if you have 4-wheel drive, how do you turn on the 4-wheel drive? How do you know if your headlights are on? If the car will turn them on automatically sometimes, maybe where are the high beams? When do you use the high beams? All those kinds of conversations that are quite complicated when you're actually starting to learn the process of driving, but you can have some of those conversations up front.
Just to add on to what you're saying, Emery, is to do cockpit drills. So, again, choosing your time and place as to when do you want to change the station on the radio? When do you want to turn on your defrosters? When do you want to, you know what I'm saying? So I got to turn up the heat. I'm too hot, or too cold. I'm too hot. So all those controls where it takes you, you have to take your eyes off of the road in order to do something, is really kind of something that has to be discussed, or you have to talk about it. So you don't need to pay a professional driving instructor to do that. parents can do that with their teens at home, but it's just something that's top it's not top of mind. We don't think of these things, and so that's why it's important that of course the MGO is involved, saying this is the criteria, these are all the things that we want to talk about. So it's driving is common sense, but it is something that you and I can have hours and hours of discussions on, because there's so many different aspects to it. But cockpit drills, very important. When and where are you going to do things? And the controls are different on every car. So maybe you have to do one lesson in mom's car and then another lesson in dad's car.
One of the other things that you talked about when we talked before was about taking them out to play in a parking lot.
Yep, I think again, vehicle control is very important. So even if you're just doing maneuvers at 5-15 kilometers per hour, you're just getting them to understand the mechanics of how does it feel. And of course, again, same principle, is every car feels a little different. So you might want to do one of the lessons with mom's car and then one of the lessons with dad's car, so they can understand kind of the difference between the two. So, just figure eights. You want to kind of do it forward, you want to do it backwards, just fun stuff as well. We mentioned early on in the podcast is the learning never ends. So, even after they get their license, we still have to have that conversation. And then what happens if they get their license in July? You don't want them to be driving alone in January and not having had that experience before because mom was too nervous the January before, right? So it's a continual thing, and that's why I'm a big supporter of graduated licensing system.
You and I have talked about this before, so I'm not sure that I made this point already, and I might be reinforcing it, and that's okay too. And that is that once they get their G2, they can drive on their own. And many will never have been on a highway before. All of a sudden, they're driving at much higher speeds. They have to merge into moving traffic. They need to be able to watch all around them. And even when they change lanes now, instead of being in the right lane, which is where they need to be driving when they're learning, um, they have cars moving perhaps faster than they are on both sides of them. And the complications go up exponentially. The requirement to continue making decisions and watch around you go up. And now you've got a load of friends in the car who are laughing and cranking up the music. And it's a very potentially dangerous situation. So, parents, after they get that G2, need to get back in the car with them, make sure they know how to merge, make sure they understand how to drive safely on a highway, and have those conversations about cranking the music and what to do when the friend says, "Hey, you can take that guy," and they want to speed, because as much as parents have more um, influence than they think they do when it comes to driving, their peers have a lot of influence too. And teens who would never do things on their own can be influenced in a group to speed or make a risky decision, or maybe just chatting and not paying attention and miss an exit. And that's when they cut across 4 lanes of traffic all at once. So you really need to continually remind them to drive safely and be aware of what's happening, even after they get a full G license.
No, I agree with that 100%, as well as to keep in mind that up until this point, we've been sheltering them. We've been sheltering them from the distractions in the car and from the peer pressure and from all of the other stuff about, like, so we need to teach them on how to cope with that when it does occur, because the first little bit they've been kind of sheltered. They haven't had to deal with that kind of stuff.
That's right. And if parents have been making good decisions all the way along, there are situations they haven't encountered yet if parents are teaching them to drive. So, or haven't been aware of, mom could see that that guy was going to pull out, so she slowed down in advance. Well, they're not paying attention to that, and they're not really thinking of it the same way you are, unless you're having those conversations as you go. So those are kind of the things that I wanted to cover. But I remember you said at the beginning there was something else you wanted to talk about, but now I can't remember what it was.
Well, I wanted to mention, kind of the newest thing in the news is how the drive test or the MTO and drive test in conjunction have been working together about trying to clear up the backlog with the testing because of the pandemic. And one of the things that were, at the top of their list was the G testing. So they've pared down the requirements for the G testing, and what does that do for traffic safety, and what does that do for our communities, and what does that say for our students? So I just kind of wanted to talk about it a little bit, to say that, just because they're not going to be testing us on these things doesn't mean they're not important. So one of the things that they took away from the test is an emergency roadside stop. So this is quite crucial for any driver to understand what is the proper procedure if something should go wrong on the roadway. So I believe it's important to talk about.
And there are a lot of things like that that we need to keep even if they aren't on the test, we need to keep practicing. We have to keep making sure. And it's not only the mechanics of an emergency roadside stop, which I believe is really, really important, but conversations about when that's important. What are the signals that you've got a flat tire? Like, how do you know? I mean, it could be the guy pulling up next to you who's pointing at your tire, but more likely the wheel is pulling hard in one direction all of a sudden. Things like that we need to have those conversations too. Parents have the most to lose, and I can tell you, I've talked to so many parents who their their son or daughter died 20 years ago and they still celebrate birthdays. It never leaves. It's just overwhelming. And to think that driver error could cause that. And this is the time to catch that. This is the time. I mean, we can't control everything in our lives, but if you have a really strong foundation for driving, then that's a really good start to the next 60 years on the road or 70 years on the road, however long they're going to be driving. And I think it's really fundamental.
So one last thing I want to bring up, kind of on the same vein as that one, is that it's the same for all drivers, right? Is that we want to make sure that we keep everybody safe on the road, in the sense that learning never ends, and that we want to make sure that we keep it top of mind. So I believe that I'm going to call out to the MTO and onto drive tests and all safety partners, to say that we need to continue with our education. We need to continue getting the word out. We need to continue keeping it top of mind and making sure that everybody does their part. And the defensive driving strategies are followed, or that they're kind of discussed, and make it commonplace to talk about it.
And the other point that I would add there is that when a police officer stops someone, um, and it's not, oh, those damn guys, they're, filling out their quotas and all that. They're the rules are there to protect you. The real rules are there to enforce um, good driving habits, and to make sure that everybody's driving by the same rules. And so often that ticket, as much as it costs a lot, first of all, for the ticket, and then for the insurance and all the repercussions of all of that, it can also be a blessing in disguise. And I can't tell you how many times I've read about people who got really ticked off because they were driving without a seatbelt, or for an example, or driving really high speed. And then the next week, they were involved in some kind of a collision where, if they hadn't been wearing that seatbelt, if that guy hadn't stopped them and they hadn't been wearing that seatbelt, they would have been killed, because they rolled the vehicle and they would have gone right through the windshield or right out the side, and the vehicle would have rolled over them. So, and driving at really high speeds or driving recklessly, as much as it is really it can be really tick you off to get the ticket. That ticket can be a blessing in disguise. And if young people are getting tickets for speeding and dangerous driving, then parents really need to step up. I mean, I know I'm ranting, and pardon me for that, but at the beginning of the pandemic, that young man who was driving 300 kilometers an hour on the Don Valley, I just a G2 driver, and it just wrong on every possible level. And where are parents? And I know I'm ranting, and but it's parents need to um keep an
But it
eye on how
But
young people are
it
driving.
goes right back to the basics again, Anne Marie, saying that we need to get them to understand it and believe it, and to like, again, it's the moral issue of we're all accountable for our actions. And so Billy and Tom and Teresa and Tina, when you're leaving the parking lot at the high school, nobody's going to be watching you. It's only your friends that are in the car with you, and so you need to decide what you're going to do. And so it's really about having that conversation and giving them the confidence to stand up for themselves and say, I'm sorry, when you're in my car, this is what's happening. You have to put your seatbelt on or you have to get out. So, or no, I'm not going to speed, or no, I'm not going to do this. They have to believe it to their core. And the only way we can do that is by educating them and kind of giving them all the facts and so on. And you really hope for the best, because once they leave your driveway, you know what they do is kind of their decisions. And so I try to say, at this point, from this point on, you're an adult and you're responsible for your own actions at this point. And which brings me to the second point of kind of what's happened with this pandemic and with the economy, with people moving from territory to territory. I've seen more mature drivers than I ever have in my career. So people in their 20s and 30s and 40s who are getting their license for the first time. So it's again having a different conversation with a different age group. You're relating to them on a different level. It's exciting. I'm excited. This is an excited time to be in driver training.
And it's also a critical time to be in driver training, because has it ever been needed so much? Because, we talk about these people who are driving at excessive speeds, and that those are the people, like I've had people say, oh, I think what you do is great, but my daughter's so responsible. I don't really have to worry about her. If she was driving in a field by herself, being responsible is a really good thing. But when she's sharing the road with the guy doing, 140 and the other guy doing 60, and the people changing lanes without looking or zigzagging in and out of traffic, being responsible isn't enough. She needs real life skills.
Good point. Well taken. I just have one last point that I think is perfect to end this on, is that at the end of the day, it takes a village. It takes a village in order to create a safe community. So it's going to be one driver at a time, and it's going to be, let's take it slow and easy, and let's make it count. That's what I mean. Experience and exposure is what makes great drivers. So let's work together and try and make that happen.
We're all on the road together. So we need to learn to drive safely around everybody.
Exactly.
So thank you so much, Christine. It's always so wonderful to see you, and I really appreciate your time. And I hope parents will not only listen to this, but share it with their friends, because that's for me, the final thing is, if your teen isn't the one driving, for whatever reason, who are they getting in a car with? And make sure that the people they're likely to get in a car with are well prepared too. And I think that sharing the podcast will help with that too.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for the invite, and it's always a pleasure. And anytime, honey.
Thanks a million. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Take care now. Bye now.